Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's highly anticipated speaker session entitled Reform, Restoration, Revitalization, and Representation, which is sponsored by the College of Public Affairs and Administration and the Center for State Policy and Leadership here at UIS and the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation. Tonight's very full program is looking specifically at tackling criminal justice reform and police accountability. I'm Dr. Bob Smith. I'm the Dean of the College, and my role tonight is to simply welcome you and to facilitate some introductions of our participants. We have what I'll describe as a powerhouse lineup of speakers organized into really three particular segments. The first really on the background, history, and overview. We have Kara Rogers, Director of the Criminal Justice Program at Millikan University. We also have Dr. Thomas Trice, Associate Professor at William Woods University. That will be our first segment. Our second segment will then be a fireside chat moderated by Tiffany Hightower, who's the Executive Director of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation. And that will feature Senator L.G. Sims Jr., Senator Robert Peters, and Representative Justin Slaughter. The final segment that we'll have will be a roundtable with our panelists. Again, that will be featuring Todd Belcour, who will be serving as the moderator, and that will be for a dialogue with Professor Rogers, Chief Mitchell Davis III of Hazel Court Police Department, and Lauren Caseberg, the legal director of the Illinois Innocence Project, and Chris Bittner, who is a professor in the School of Law Enforcement and Justice at Western Illinois University. Then we'll close with an open question and answer period, and we will try our best to facilitate as many questions and get you to get as many responses as we possibly can. I would like to say that before we actually begin, I would just like to give the floor, or is it Zoom space, to Tiffany Hightower, who's the Executive Director of the Illinois Black Caucus Foundation, who's partnering with us in delivering this series of programs. So perhaps, Tiffany, maybe a quick welcome from you before we jump right into our first segment.
No problem, Dr. Smith. I will graciously accept the Zoom space or the Zoom floor as we go forward. Welcome, everybody. When we decided to partner several months ago, we wanted to make sure that we provided some very informative information in regards to the pillars that came out. And one of the goals of the foundation has been to really focus on this representation matters, revitalization, and restoration piece. So we're really excited as we go forth, as this is the second installment in this, and we have 3 more to go, to just welcome everybody. And we hope that you learn a lot. We hope that your brains come up with a whole bunch of questions to ask, and just join us in this very important discussion. So once again, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Really, now let's jump right into our first segment, again, which will cover some of the history and background of really sort of a crucial issue, ongoing difficulty, and really something that we need to address, I think, as society. And we're just grateful to have this opportunity to dialogue with you and to explore this issue a little bit closer. So without further ado, please, Professor Rogers and Dr. Trice, this is, please, your segment now. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I will take the first part of the floor, as the senator said. Welcome. Thank you all for attending tonight. And I will just start with a little bit of my background and why the message that and the history part of this that I'm talking about tonight will kind of make sense. It'll kind of connect the dots, and then I will gladly turn it over to Ms. Rogers, who will handle the policy piece. And so we all are aware of a lot of what we assume the history of law enforcement is, but I'm just going to jump through some real historical moments here and then kind of bring you to the forefront. So law enforcement has been around since the slave trade. It started in the history of actually slave patrols. It moved from that to the vigilante kind of mentality. And then it went back again to the slave patrols and moved forward to what was so-called the professional history part of law enforcement. And coming out of that, and that was in the early 20th century, between 1920 and 1970. But throughout that time, law enforcement continued to evolve and change into what they called the community service or community aspect of policing. However, all of that history is really not relevant in the sense that it never actually was intended for the purpose of what it was designed to do. And so I worked in this career field, retired as an assistant major. And so doing that for over 25 years, and I still currently, I instruct and teach in the criminology and social behavioral sciences, as well as in the business school of technology. And I've always talked about the construct of law enforcement. And as a law enforcement officer, I can speak vividly to the things that law enforcement has succeeded at and the things that it has failed at. And one of the things constructually that it has failed at is the leadership model that was designed. And so part of the biggest issues historically through the principle of law enforcement is that there has not been this equality of the power structure that exists in the actual organization. And the business model that is designed has never actually trickled down and been achieved. So for instance, when we talk about the professional model, we must first start with the definition of how we define professionalism. And professionalism in most career fields are defined by either education, some kind of hurdle that you must cross to get over that, through extensive hours of training. And we have over 18,000 law enforcement organizations throughout the country. But over 70% of those organizations do not require any education whatsoever. And with that being said, that begs the question, are we actually producing a trade or are we actually producing a profession? And there is plenty of data out there to show that in order to actually get people to see it as a profession and to have people want to go to school, and there are plenty of people going to school seeking 4-year degrees in criminal justice, trust me, we have to do twofold things. We have to look at it from the actual policy side and government side, and we have to look at it from the pay side of who do we want out here. And so this whole transition, and from a personal standpoint, I have, coming into this profession, I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was 3 years old. I knew I wanted to be in law enforcement. So this wasn't a job that I just sought out as I was coming up and said, oh, let me do this. No, I knew I wanted to do this from the time I was 3 years old. So I set my eye on that goal. And throughout my career, being a native of East St. Louis, growing up in East St. Louis, I had several different negative encounters with law enforcement throughout the country, not just in the Metro East. And that didn't deter me from getting into the field. That inspired me even more to become part of that solution rather than actually just turn my back to that. And so I think when we look at the overall arcing history of law enforcement, it has had a long history of being a division of inequality, not because of 100% bad actors, but leadership, government, and policies also play a significant role in those areas because the agents and the actors on the field, they should be held accountable by the leaders. And the process starts at the entry gate. I always tell people the antecedent to finding out bad actors is the part in which they fill out the application for the job. and who's doing the background and who's doing that and evaluating that with some criteria that is actually going to identify those bad actors. And that is a difficult process if there are not those people in place that represent those communities in which they're serving. And so that's where it starts, because the history of it, going all the way back, never had any of those things. And I want to end with a point where I'm going to transition and turn it over to Dr. Rogers, is that today, just today, we find out that in the state of Louisiana, that there are still Jim Crow laws that are on the books that actually had juries that can convict 10-2, 9-2, 8-1, a citizen in America against the United States Constitution, and that person served life in prison. Totally over a century ago, those laws still exist and were just squashed by the Supreme Court. Not with any kind of reparations or anything dealing with getting the individuals that were actually convicted under those laws and the police that actually perpetrated those arrests and testified in those courts. There is no reparations for those individuals. So the history is that where we came from and where we are today, leadership is the key identifier of changing this trajectory, and finding leaders that actually have the equality to represent the communities in which they serve is paramount. And policy is linked to that. There is no bad actors in law enforcement without policy. And so policy is extremely important. And I will turn it over to Dr. Rogers to talk a little bit about how that connects with those two pieces.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, thank you everybody for attending tonight and sharing the space. I'm honored to be in space with all of you, all you speakers and panelists. Thank you so much. And so absolutely, I have to say how much I agree with everything you just mentioned, Dr. Trice, because one of the things that I had to learn, even in my own studies, because I am a DPA student there at UIS, but again, Director of Criminal Justice, I've been in government for 15 years, and I've actually, this is my, I don't even know how many years, I've been teaching since 2012. So the thing is, I've had some time to actually evaluate what I've learned over the years, right? And growing up in the criminal justice system, understanding everything that we were taught from start to finish on day one, it is about honestly looking at how we have been evaluating our policies, our practices. And I'll give you just one example, because this could go anywhere, right? We could talk about any of the policies and practices in the CJ system, but I want to speak specifically about juvenile justice, right? If we just focus on just one area as an example, in juvenile justice, we used to think that, young people, we would have a way of scaring them straight, right? We've talked about these kind of policies before, I'm sure, in many arenas. We talked about Scared Straight programs and DARE and all these other things, right? And for a time, they may have seemed to have worked, or so we thought. But again, it comes back to understanding and reviewing different policies that are in place, because when we do take a closer look at the things that when we take a closer look at the programs that we're running or the initiatives that we've started or created, we do find that the efficiency, the effectiveness, it's not exactly what we thought. So for instance, whenever we are thinking about ways to work with juvenile justice, the criminal justice system, once upon a time, did not actually think about brain development, brain science, right? We did not. Once upon a time, we did not think about whether or not we were evaluating a young person's behavior change. And so that is something that we have to keep in mind, right? As we are thinking about policy changes and any kind of curriculum changes, how are we evaluating these things? How do we determine success? And one of the things in the criminal justice system that we are, just very used to is, how we evaluate goals, objectives, those kinds of things. But it was never about the individual. And we're starting to see now, in terms of policy changes and things now, we're starting to see that a lot of programs, especially if they're going to be applying for funding, they have to evaluate how they are focusing on the individuals. And so again, once upon a time, that was just not the direction of the criminal justice system. We focus on mental health now, where we're focusing more on trauma-informed practices and even the staff, like making sure the staff who run these programs are also taken care of. Self-care is a huge thing, right? So these are all different things that we're starting to discuss. And it takes for policy changes sometimes for us to be able to have these conversations on a much larger scale. And so at this point, this is the direction that we're going. There are a lot of law changes that had to happen, especially in Illinois, so that we could continue to have these conversations. And anybody running these programs or anybody at the ground level, right, the front line, in order for them to know what it is that they need to do, sometimes these laws and policies have to trickle down, and they have to start the institutional level, and then the public managers have to actually take note of all of this and look deeper into how they need to run their programs, and then that information is given to the front line. So that's basically how this needed to happen. That's why policy is so important, because once something is in the front line, this is where public value becomes something that we have to take note of as well, because that public value then becomes the next set of laws and policies that we are going to discuss and vote on. So that's basically, the spiel that I have on policy and how important this is. It just gives us a way to evaluate the work that's been done and the work that needs to be done moving forward.
Well, please, may I thank you both. That's an important context and background that I think is going to inform the rest of the discussion this evening. And what I'd like to do now is to have a shift over to our second segment as part of tonight's programming, which is really an opportunity to have I think a very robust fireside chat with some outstanding legislative leaders that again have been very involved with these efforts over a long period of time. And again, that will be led by Tiffany Hightower, again, of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. So Tiffany and guests, and once again, the honorable senators and representatives, we're very pleased to have you here again.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Smith. As always, it's such a pleasure. First of all, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be joined in this moment by Senator L.G. Sims, Senator Robert Peters, and State Representative Justin Slaughter. And if anybody paid attention to that wonderful omnibus bills that passed during lame duck earlier this year, our wonderful Senator Sims and Representative Slaughter actually led, they were the co-chairs of Pillar 1, and Senator Peters really came in and helped a lot with cash bail. So I'm going to start and I'm going to say, hey, I'm throwing this question out. What was the thought process around coming up with the package in the way that you all came up with the package to present in chamber? Well, both.
Well, I guess I'll start. First, let me thank the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation, led by our dynamic executive director, Tiffany Hightower, for the work that she does in this space to not only educate, but advocate on behalf of the Black community across the state of Illinois. But also let me thank my alma mater, University of Illinois at Springfield, for hosting this event tonight. This is exactly what we should be doing. This is how you learn. This is how you expand your horizon. And this is one of the reasons why I was so proud to be a student at the university. Tiffany, to your specific question, the way that we came up. Okay, let me back up for a minute, because I think it's important for us to have a discussion and do some level setting at the very beginning, because there have been so many attacks and so much mis and disinformation that has been spewed about what happened with the Safety Act, the criminal or which is more commonly known as a criminal justice reform bill, that it's important to make sure that we level set. It's possible to want to professionalize the profession of policing without attacking policing, or without attacking police. Let me say that again. It is possible to want to professionalize the profession of policing without attacking police. And I think what many have missed in this moment is the attacks are not necessarily policy-based or policy-driven, but they're politically motivated. Because what you are seeing as people recruit candidates and as they talk about their agenda for the 2022 elections, they are pushing this so-called attack on police as the motivation for why they're looking for candidates. So now, having said that, and we can come back to that topic for a moment, we started out with this desire. Chairman Slaughter, and Chairman Slaughter can speak for himself, and Chairman Peters and I, we talked about this in conjunction with then Chairwoman of the Joint Black Caucus, Senate Majority Leader Kimberly Lightford. We wanted a bold, transformative initiative that would fundamentally change the criminal justice system. So we didn't want to nibble around the edges. We didn't want to just change one thing or another. We wanted something that would fundamentally change the criminal justice system. We wanted to fundamentally reimagine what the criminal justice system looks like here in the state of Illinois. And that produced the Safety Act. Now, there were some who thought that we were trying to bite off too much. There were some who said, take one part and leave the rest alone. Well, we've been legislating around the margins on the criminal justice system for a long time, and that's another one of the misconceptions that took place with the passage of this bill. This bill didn't come out of it just didn't come out of left field. This bill was the result of hours and hours of public testimony, years of ideas that have been languishing in the legislature without the ability to get passed. So this was the moment as we looked at what happened in the wake of George Floyd's murder, there were so many of our allies if there was one benefit to the pandemic, it was the fact that folks were sitting at home and they focused in on what was going on, things that are happening in our communities every day. And they had the chance to sit and watch and see the pain, the very real pain that our communities experience. So there were folks who, rightly or wrongly, they have issues that are going on in their own respective communities, but now they had a chance to see the things that were going on in our communities front and center. And we were able to have these very authentic, very difficult at times conversations about what was real and what needed to change in our community. So there were times where as we strategized about the bill, there were folks who were saying, "You guys are crazy. You're asking for too much." But for us, looking at this moment, if you wanted radical change, you wanted to transfer, you wanted to reimagine criminal justice, this was that moment. This was that package to start that discussion. And frankly, we're not done.
Right. Most definitely. Good evening, everyone. And Chairman Sims certainly knocked it out of the ballpark in terms of level setting and kind of taking us through our thought process, putting together, as he rightfully called it, a bold, ambitious, transformative plan. I will just add on to that. But like Senator Sims said, a lot of these legislative initiatives had been out there for years. Our most senior representative in the Black Caucus in the House, Leader Mary Flowers, some of these provisions in this bill she was pushing as a freshman legislator 30 years ago. A lot of these bills were around for a long time. But I'd be remiss if I did not actually highlight the great work of you, Tiffany Hightower, as the executive director of the Illinois Black Caucus Foundation, because what we also did was have a retreat just prior to really Chairman Sims really kind of putting all this together. We had a retreat. We brought in experts on many of the areas. Of course, we looked at three main buckets: sentencing reform, of course, police reform, and also a third prong, which has been materializing here this session, which is the violence prevention part. But that really added some research-based context to what we needed to do and what we wanted to do with our plan, and really gave us the confidence to look at this very comprehensively and holistically. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of the many aspects of the Safety Act. It was really, really one of those things where we were able to leverage a critical moment to do some things that really were overdue. Some would say this has been overdue for over 400 years. But what we really, really wanted to do was make sure that we had some progress. Many of us were marching, we were protesting. It was important that we go from not just talking about things, but actually getting things done. And just grateful that we were able to put everything together.
Senator Peters.
I'll just keep it brief. The co-chairs did so much work on this and really made this happen. And as they noted, people have been working on these issues for quite some time. I'll just say fundamentally, at the end of the day, the conversation we're having is about public safety. We all know that's a concern. It's something that everyone's been concerned about. They've been concerned about it for year after year. We see it with press conference after press conference every summer when it comes to violence. And I think what we want to talk about is whatever we can do to reduce that violence, whether that's within the systems of policing and incarceration and in terms of public safety. And so to me, what this, sort of was all about is that we saw something very traumatic and very painful on video. We've been seeing traumatic videos of people being murdered, particularly by police, over and over again. The Black Lives Matter movement didn't pop up in 2020. It really popped up in 2012. So that's 8 years of organizing that existed for quite some time. And there's a reason why that happened. Whether it's Trayvon Martin or it's Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald. So at the end of the day, people had, they had enough. They said enough is enough. And so there was this huge, upswell of organizing that came about. But it doesn't mean that the work that we did is something that we sacrificed when it came to public safety. It was more about what does it mean to define public safety broadly. We can't keep doing the same practices over and over again and keep expecting different results. For 30 years, we've been practicing the same criminal justice policies. And as we know, like I said, it will be the Monday after every summer, and someone will write a story about there was violence this week or there was something going on here this week. And that's not just a Chicago thing, that's a thing we see throughout the entire state. And so at the end of the day, the core of the work that we're doing is grounded in a public safety that says public safety belongs to everybody. It's for everybody. That no matter your zip code, you should have the ability to feel safe, to live safe, and to know that you can touch and grab it. And so oftentimes when we think about a system where we take money out of people's pockets, that's not money that they can put on their table when it comes to food or rent for the roof over their head, or to be able to put goods in their kids' backpacks. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that everybody has those things so they can have a safe and just life. So the co-chairs really sort of laid it out. There's been colleagues who've been working on this for quite some time. And I'm just proud to say that in Illinois, more so than any other state in the country, we took systemic and decisive action to fundamentally change our systems when it comes to public safety, and that we can actually brag after years of governors that I think have disappointed us. We can brag about the government of Illinois leading the country when it comes to creating change and creating good, powerful change for people. And so instead of moving to Georgia or New York or California, now stay here, move here, live here, be here.
Well, isn't that a great plug for living in the state of Illinois? But to your point, Senator Peters, the definition of insanity is to what? Continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. And what you all really did was you came together and you figured out a way to get at a different result, right? And we hear the litany of names after names of Black folks, Black and brown people dying at the hands of an unjust criminal justice system. We throw out the word bad apples all the time. The bad apples playing. And in the beginning, we heard a lot about the intersection between history, policy, and legislation. So let's talk about what the Safety Act really is, what the hope is for it to really do on the ground throughout the state of Illinois for people. When you all came together, what is the actual hope, the legislative intent behind it all? Go ahead, Rep. Slaughter. I see you off mute.
Well,
and I saw the baby too. Hi, baby.
Yeah, the baby Juliana was up here not too long ago. No, I think that what we want to hammer home here is that criminal justice reform is improving and enhancing public safety. And real quick, just back to what Chairman Sims was talking about, criminal justice reform is not being anti-law enforcement. It's not being anti-police. So when you look at some of the prongs, some of the provisions, or not some, all of the provisions within the Safety Act, we start to reimagine how this looks. So one of the interesting, unique sort of perspectives and things that we did with the Safety Act was stagger the main provisions here. So training, we wanted to have more crisis intervention training. We wanted to move away from warrior style training. That's really important for our officers. Body cams, which will be rolled out between 2022 all the way to 2025. We know how important that is for building trust between law enforcement and our communities. Use of force. We're calling for a statewide use of force policy in the beginning of 2022, something that we're still building towards. That was important, not just to legislators, but when we had the series of hearings, joint hearings that Senator Sims pointed out, that was one of the main things that law enforcement wanted to address. And then, we've been talking about policy and how that can root out racism in policing. So then we really wanted to applaud and uplift Attorney General Raul with the licensing piece. We really are going to take a major step forward with our certification system that we're building out, really going from something that was non-existent to something that's pretty robust. We think that it's going to be really effective. These are all provisions and initiatives that we know will make us more safe, that will enhance and improve public safety. A lot of different other initiatives here. I'm going to let my colleagues talk about them, but cash bail, I'm sure Chairman Peters wants to take a bite out of the apple on that one.
That was going to be my next question, but go ahead.
One little quick thing to kind of maybe launch this to some of my colleagues. This is not just a law enforcement police measure. This is a holistic, comprehensive look at our criminal justice system. So we also look at sentencing reform, right? Alternatives to custody, more judicial discretion when it comes to lower level felonies. A lot of in-prison reforms here, modernizing our earned credit program. That's very, very important. Ending prison gerrymandering. And I think we're still at the table on that, I believe. I don't think that went live just yet, but ending prison. Okay, yeah, ending prison gerrymandering. So these are, it's very, very, very holistic when you look at what we're doing here. Violence prevention and what we're doing there, an unprecedented investment there. Chairman Sims, as the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, can tell you more about that, but leveraging Medicaid to address chronic trauma in underserved communities. All things that we know play into the social equity, racial equity discussion as it interfaces with our criminal justice system. But these are just some things that obviously we have on the table that we're still working on. Qualified immunity, of course, we created a task force there. Chairman Sims and Peters and I also extremely hard at work there, looking at producing a report as it relates to that. And so you see a very, very transformative measure here that is not just solely a law enforcement police bill. So I wanted to make that point. But with that said, I'll pass it over to my colleagues.
And Tiffany, I think it's important to note that the Safety Act is not called the law enforcement reform bill. It is a criminal justice reform measure. It calls for safety in our communities, accountability for law enforcement, and training and safe and equitable communities. And I think that's important. It's not, folks get so caught up in the fact that there are measures included in the Safety Act that will call for law enforcement officers to be held accountable to suggest in some way that this is only geared towards law enforcement. It's not. When we talk about this measure being holistic, because it fundamentally changes everything. And Representative Slaughter ran down that list of items that are included in here, because it talks about the criminal justice system that values a criminal justice system that values life equitably. And I think that's what gets lost in this discussion.
Yeah.
This is not about police officers, only about police officers interacting with the public, but it is about a criminal justice system that disenfranchises and devalues the value of an individual's life. And if that and there is hard data that demonstrates and shows that Black and brown people and marginalized people who go into the criminal justice system have a very different experience with the criminal justice system than their white or wealthy counterparts. That has to change. And I know you're getting ready to talk about and ask this question about cash bail, and I want to make sure that Chairman Peters has the ability to talk through that issue, because that when we talk about the millions of dollars of wealth that have been stripped out of communities by virtue of the fact that the use of cash bail, which is one of the most insidious parts of our criminal justice system, that we have to use cash for a person to bail themselves out of free and get their freedom. That leads to a whole host of problems. That's why you see a plea bargain rate that is in the 90 percentile. 90%. Folks are taking pleas just so they can get their freedom. And that is not justice. That's not equity. If you have the ability to, our Constitution says that everyone has their day, and they're innocent until proven guilty. All right, everyone should have their day in court. If you're not able to do that, because the deck is already stacked against you, if you're poor and you're Black and you go into a courtroom and you already know that the likelihood is that you are not going to go home because you can't make a bail of $100, let alone $10,000. What does that look like for you in your freedom? But Sharon Peters, I'll toss it over to you to talk more about cash bail.
So
or Tiffany, yeah, if you want.
I'm gonna launch this up for you guys really, really nicely. But you talk about something really interesting there, Senator Sims, talking about the kind of economic disparities and the way that they play into the criminal justice disparities that Black and brown people have to go through. And Dr. Trice, in the opening, he mentioned the Jim Crow laws that are on the books in Louisiana, but we have Black laws here in Illinois for a while. So while we talk about who we are as a state, I do want us to look at, though, because this is key here, the things that people talked about the most, very salacious: qualified immunity and cash bail. Those were the two things that you heard about. And the cash bail reform, that hit the news nationwide, as I received a lot of those media inquiries, but that hit the news nationwide. So Senator Peters, I really want you to really get into discussing cash bail, and anybody else wanting to talk about why the notion of qualified immunity is actually so salacious, especially in the state of Illinois. Senator Peters.
Yeah, so I'll focus on cash bail, and the others can focus on qualified immunity if they so choose. But the way I'll say this about cash bail is that the first point is anytime your freedom is determined by money, it has nothing to do with public safety. It has to deal with particularly class. And then we understand in our criminal legal system, that means race, class, and gender. And so when we think about the system of cash bail, again, it has nothing to do with public safety. And I got to repeat that like 800 times. It does not make your community safer, because there are people like, for example, Kyle Rittenhouse, who shot and killed 2 people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who was able to get out because he could afford bail. And there's other people who are poor and they're Black and they're women, like Yvette Mays, who was down lived in the South Side who couldn't afford to get out. And that's the disparity that we're talking about. So what we wanted to fix and hit at the intersection of is the race, class, and gender parts, as well as to talk about public safety. So ending cash bail was about getting rid of those intersections and creating a more equitable system. And it was also in there pieces that fixed a broken part of our criminal justice system. So what we understand is if you're a domestic violence survivor, and oftentimes if you called the police, people who were possibly stalking you or going after you were easily turned right back around and sent to the home. The burden of proof that they would not abuse a loved one, it just didn't really exist. They were just let off. Under the Pretrial Fairness Act, or the cash bail part, they now, if someone has committed or is accused of, accused of domestic violence or sexual assault, they actually have to have proof that they're not going to do that again, or that they didn't do it in the first place, or whatever needs to be happening. They can't just be turned back to come to the house. That is something that we actually strengthen. It's the reason why domestic violence and sexual assault organizations throughout the state supported it and said that this is criminal justice reform that puts survivor safety first. So when we think about it, we do that A and that B, and the last C, as Senator Simpson pointed out, is the fact that you are innocent until proven guilty. This is supposed to be what the law is about. And fundamentally, our criminal justice system seems to ignore one of the most popular presidents in the entire country, and his words, which is, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. If we act out of fear in our systems of safety, we are going to make things worse. It is why we've constantly been chasing the white whale like it's Moby Dick when it comes to public safety. We just keep going after it over and over again. And it's because we're acting out of fear, and we need to stop doing that. When bond is fundamentally taking money out of people's pockets instead of putting it on their table or allowing them to pay rent or to get their kids clothes, and it creates an inherent discrepancy between a black woman, a poor black woman, and a rich white man, that is not about safety. That's not about equity. It doesn't do anything to improve people's lives, and it comes from a place of inherent fear, some of it of systemic bias, racism, sexism, and patriarchy, and some of it from the fact that, particularly for me in politics, that the risk of trying to create change is not necessarily always the most popular one. But we're not in the business of doing what's popular. We're in the business of doing what is right. And so after what we've seen in 2020, and after what we've seen over the last few decades, after what we've seen when it comes to a justice system that has a horrid history, particularly if you're Black in this country, we took action and said, let's make sure that no matter your zip code, no matter where you live, may a white person in DuPage and a Black man down in South Shore have the same benefits and the same life, and they can live a free and just and safe community. I think that's something that we took action on. I think bail hits right at that. And fundamentally, we reimagined what it meant to have safety. And hopefully, in 2023, when someone is, stuck in a jail somewhere, and then they're able to get out, and it's not going to take money out of their pocket, and that working mom has that food, and when she has that money, when she goes to the grocery store, she has a little bit more comfort, because at that point that kid has something that they need, and that does not repeat and recycle trauma, and it helps to create some sense of healing that people need. At the end of the day, I like to say this, and I'm going on my rant. You can't let me just, I was born deaf. I have a speech impediment.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
I'll finish real quick, and I'll say this. Public safety is pretty clear. It's simple. If you look at it, what they have in the North Shore, they need to have in the South Shore. You need to have a good school. You need to have a good job. You need to have a grocery store. You need to be able to get from point A to point B easily. You need to know that you have some power in your community, your city, your state. If you have those things, you have safety. And if we don't give that to people, we're not actually fixing the problem. We're just trying to brush it over. We're trying to hide it. And we're trying to stick to the easy political decisions. When it came to the Pretrial Fairness Act, it's about making sure and grounding it that people have those things and they have what they need. I am done. I'll turn over to somebody else. Thank you, Tiffany.
No, that was really great. I like when you get on your little soapbox, Senator Peters. I've known you for a while, and I met you on a soapbox, so that was pretty all right with me. Seriously, though, as we try kind of wrap this up to turn this over for the panel, and please, if your schedule permits, my hope is that you all can stay and maybe lend to the panel discussion as it comes up, or any of the questions that our audience might have. One, as a former certified domestic violence professional, I do appreciate the work that was done in terms of strengthening that piece of that bill. I think one of the questions, and then maybe this is a policy question, or what is the hope in regards to the service and or program or policy that will come out of this legislation, HB 3653? And thank you, Senator Sanders, for dropping all that knowledge in the chat.
Absolutely. So what I saw that I cheated a little bit, so I saw that question. So what I did do was what we tried to do, and what we have continued to try to do throughout this process, Chairman Slaughter, Chairman Peters, and myself, as we've tried to put out the real information about what the Safety Act does, what the Safety Act doesn't do also. So what I dropped in the chat for everyone is a website that we created, hb3653.org. And it has not only does it have information or testimonials from supporters of the law, but it also has the language of the law itself. So if you want to go and read what the Safety Act actually says versus what somebody told you it said, you can go right here on this website to read it. If you want to read and see what the different tenets that we've been talking about tonight, what they are, that you can find them right here on this website. So to speak specifically to what comes out of it, there's no one program that's going to come out of this. I'm going to pick up where Chairman Peters just kind of left off. As we compiled the Safety Act, we were talking about fundamental problems that are in our community. These are historic problems. These are foundational problems that must be addressed. No one program is going to fix that. This you have to address, and that's why Tiffany, to the credit, and your credit, and the credit of the caucus, that's why these 4 pillars were put into place. You can't pass one bill to address the challenges that face the Black community. This has to be a holistic approach dealing with. And I have often said that the criminal justice system sits at the end of failures in all the other areas. When you fail children in the educational system, they end up in the school to prison pipeline. If you do not adequately address a substance or mental health challenge, that person often ends up in the criminal justice system. If you do not have a person who can feed themselves or their families, that person often, if they don't have an economic opportunity for themselves, they end up in the criminal justice system. So there's no one program that's going to come out of it, but what you will see is Illinois fundamentally changing its criminal justice system to recognize that everyone should have the same opportunities, they should have the same abilities, and when they go into a courtroom, or when they go into a courtroom, they should not be held in custody because they cannot afford to pay a cash bail. When they come into contact with a law enforcement officer, the law enforcement officer is trained, but also there are systems put into place to identify individuals who should not be law enforcement officers in the first place. So when you have that, that's why you have that certification process that Chairman Slaughter talked about earlier, to identify individuals who should not be officers in the first place, and if there is a pattern of behavior that should keep them from continuing in their service. One department to the next. We have found in this certification discussion. Let me pause for a moment, and I know Chief Davis would chime in on this when he gets to the microphone. During these discussions, we were finding officers who were engaged in a whole host of activities, be they sexual assault or sexual misconduct or inappropriate behavior with individuals in their care. And what they would do while they were being investigated was go from one department to another. And the department they were going to did not even didn't check their background to see what was going on before they went from one department when they went to get hired in another department. So that's why the certification process was so critical, because it forces departments to make sure that they are monitoring the certification capability and the requirements, so that if an individual is not eligible, they shouldn't be serving as a police officer. If they are not adequately trained, they shouldn't be serving. So that's really so there's no one program or one project that's going to come from this, but what you'll see is a fundamental change in how we think about criminal justice system in the state of Illinois.
Mm-hmm. And then real quick, just to add on, Director Hightower, you were asking what would come out of this. Just two quick things. We really wanted to inspire here. Critical moment in history, a lot of folks taking it to the next level in marching and protesting. When you hear Chairman Peters say public safety for all, when you hear me say, hey, we're going from protest to progress, we really wanted to show folks that we as a society could come together to, in fact, bring about change from a policy perspective. We wanted to really have it be that powerful for people. We're really elated that it wasn't just a local thing, but it actually had some impact all across the country. The second big thing, and really grateful that Chairman Sims had put together that website, is because we want to use this to educate. A lot of folks kind of know what's going on, especially as it relates to disparities within our criminal justice system and some of the data and the research. But we wanted to use the Safety Act to bring really the general public to the table to start to process, start to understand, start to become educated on what some of the areas, these important areas, critical areas of our criminal justice system are all about. And yes, emotions are running high as we look across, the public safety spectrum, but that is a good thing. We're having these discussions, we're having these panel discussions, we're having meetings, we're engaging the community around how we get to the next level. And this is what this is all about. As legislators, as lawmakers, yes, we certainly want to do our thing, when it comes to Springfield and being in the chamber and legislating, but we wanted to do something that really, really was going to engage at the ground level with people. We wanted to get folks interested in understanding what criminal justice reform is all about.
So you all are, each of you are some of my favorite legislators, actually. So, and you know that I'm not even, blowing smoke, but I appreciate the courage, right, that it took to take this piece of that omnibus package, because this is the piece that was one of the most contentious, I would want to say. I think, is that a fair word to describe it? I think we're going to shift. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Smith. I would love if you all could stay. If you can't, then in 1 minute, give me like the heart of what you want someone to know before you have to get off this call, and just know that I'll be tapping you again to do something soon.
Well, I appreciate it. And I will, I'm going to stick around as long as I can. I do have another event I've got to get to, but I've got to say in this moment also, this is about a transformational effort. And I mentioned him earlier, and I know we're going to hear from him soon, Chief Mitchell Davis, who is the first Black president of the Illinois Chiefs of Police. Let me say that again, in 2021. The first Black president of the Illinois Chiefs of Police, an individual who is, and I make no bones about this, and in the interest of full disclosure, this is my friend, this is my fraternity brother, but this is a courageous brother, a courageous man who is willing to say and stick to his convictions about who and what is right, and that's what's necessary in this moment. We need individuals, and Chairman Slaughter just mentioned that these very difficult discussions, and they are emotional. They are charged. There are folks who I have had folks, and Tiffany, you and I have talked about this, and I've had, I know, just like Chairman Slaughter and Chairman Peters, death threats and attacks on our family, and folks who have come up and accosted my wife in the grocery store, because they hear all the mis and disinformation. A picture of my wife and kids on posted on a website, including our dog, on a website, attacking me. So when you talk about courage, it's about us doing what we know is right, because we have to make sure that these are tough decisions. They're tough, but they're tough. But why are they tough? Because to me, they're just the right things to do. And to me, that's not tough. To me, that we are. I'm not. I use a statement that my dad would say to me when he was alive. I don't want to give you credit for something you're supposed to do. But that's what, as legislators, that's what we are charged with doing. We are charged with making a difference on behalf of the individuals who entrust us to represent them. So it's been my honor. I thank you. I'm going to stick around as long as I can, Tiffany. But I say I do have jump to another one. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for participating this evening. Again, to my colleagues, thank you for everything that you've done. And Tiffany, I don't know if it's appropriate. The three of us were just awarded the champion of state criminal justice reform by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. There's an award that the three of us received. So thank you. But I give that credit to us as a team, because it's indicative of the work that we've done. And I mentioned at the outset, we're not done yet.
Well, first of all, I'm always impressed. We are going to throw it to the panel. I did see Senator Sims, though you did get your first of all, servants of all, we shall transcend all plug in there. I caught that. I caught that. So
I have to do that. That goes without saying.
So I'm looking forward to Chief Davis coming on in there. But yes, I see it. But I'm going to throw it over to Dr. Smith, so we can start the panel and at least get some of your thoughts while you can be on the call. Thank you so much.
Please, thank you all. Wonderful dialogue, important perspectives, insights, and frankly, interconnections that, I think were just shared by some of the key legislative leaders for police reform and accountability in the state. And hats off to you for participating in this. Let me quickly shift gears to, I think, an important component of this, and our third component, which is our roundtable with our distinguished panelists here. And all I'm going to do right now is to maybe reintroduce Todd Belcourt, who's the co-founder, executive director of Social Change, who'll be serving as the moderator for this section. And I know we'll be asking some questions of our panelists. And Todd, I did introduce the panelists before, so please, up to you. But I think you could probably get right to things, and we'll just go from there. So I want to maximize this component. So thank you. Looking forward to this.
Thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate the chance to share and dig a little deeper on a lot of the work that's already been done, not only by these, legislative history-making legislators that you had a chance to speak with, but also some of the advocates and academics who are on the ground every day, who you may not have heard of, who are doing courageous work without thanks in order to make sure that everyone has a chance to really enjoy and know what it feels like to be safe in their community. One of the things that you heard is a constant theme that our communities aren't safe. It requires money to feel that way. That means the system is failing. So I appreciate all those legislators, and all the kudos and awards they get are justly deserved. Because at the end of the day, there's a reason why these legislative proposals have been on the docket for 20, 30 years, because it takes not just an incredible amount of courage, but it takes also an art to kind of get the process together, kind of make the sausage work, to do something that honestly is very controversial and in many cases incendiary. You heard Senator Sims already mentioned that folks are getting death threats over this, over doing the right thing. So I want to give another salute to the legislators who just had a chance to share a little bit, but also take a moment to pass the mic to some other incredible advocates who I really love for you to get more familiar with and hear from today. Kiria Rogers, the Director of Criminal Justice at Millikan University, Lauren Kaysenberg, the Legal Director of the Illinois Innocence Project, Dr. Chris Bittner, Professor of Law at Western Illinois University, and of course, you've already heard about Chief of Police Mitchell Davis of the Hazel Crest Police Department. Thank you all for joining us today. It's an honor to be in your company. I want to ask one question of kind of all of you, and it relates to what was already touched on by the legislators about the courage it takes to do this work, the fact that this work can cost you your life. When you think about the gravity of that statement, what that really means, understanding that you're helping people at the gap, people who are not voiceless, but certainly ignored, and people that other people turn their backs on. What led you to make that decision to go into this work and go all in the way in which you have? Anyone can take this question to start.
I'll jump into this one first, because that's actually the very first thing I do talk about when people do ask me why I do what I do every day. Because I do this because some people don't have a voice. They don't even know they have a voice. Some are too young to speak for themselves. And I often give the example of my very first day in a courtroom and how it felt like it was the right place for me to be. It was a story about a young girl who was being abused by her own biological father. And this case broke me in so many ways that you could just never imagine. And I'm obviously sparing a lot of details here. I knew then that I wanted to be a voice for someone who could not speak for themselves. And I would do whatever it took to make sure that I could do this. Even and I'm a professor, but again, working in government too, the thing is, there are people all around us who need people like, people like us, people who are willing to be in this space. I mean, when you're talking about death threats, it takes it to a whole nother level. But yet we do this because of the work, the passion, it's necessary. We do this because people are threatened.
Thank you for that. And I know it's been highlighted not only the way in which you've taken particular leadership over this, Professor Rogers, but it's also been highlighted a bit the way in which Chief of Police Mitchell Davis has had a chance to really weigh in and under heavy fire and scrutiny from his own colleagues has spoken up to say what's right. And can you share a little bit about what led you to make that courageous decision, if you don't mind? And then we'll talk a little bit more with you, Director, and Professor thereafter.
Well, thank you. Actually, it's already been answered. Doing the right thing, it's never wrong to do the right thing. And that's just where I stand. And I based all that decision to move forward on my own life experiences, both inside and outside of law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, been a Black man for 58 years. And even in law enforcement, I'm still faced with many of the challenges that those that are not in my profession actually still face from my colleagues. And I have an inside view that I've had from various levels over my 30-year career, and it gives me a unique perspective. And I share that perspective with my colleagues, and there are many of them that are, they just don't know. And my goal is to give them the ability to empathize and be able to understand some of the challenges that we're faced with. And I know that there's folks out there. I don't even look at what they say about me on social media, because law enforcement, when they hear someone such as myself speaking the way that I do and challenging the way law enforcement has been done, it's not popular, but I could care less about that. I'm a man of faith. I believe that this is my assignment, and I haven't been put in this position to be the first Black president of the Illinois Chiefs in the 80-year history just for no reason. And it's not just about me being the president. I did this long before I became the president of the Illinois Chiefs Association. Wherever I'm at, I'm going to speak truth to power. And because once again, it's the right thing to do. And as far as those that come after me, I believe that I've got the armor on, and the person that has me in this position and in this situation is going to protect me. So that's my feeling on it, and excited to give some more insight on it.
Well, thank you for taking on that assignment. Many people receive an assignment but don't take it. So for you to take it and run with it and with faith and really be in harm's way to do what's necessary, it means the world to so many people that you're helping who may not even be born yet. But we talk about the wrongs that you're speaking out against, and we're talking about how dangerous it is just to tell the truth. With this, I'd like to rotate to Legal Director casework. And if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit about what happens when people aren't telling the truth, and as a result, you end up helping people who are wrongfully convicted, and how that impacts not just individuals, but the chilling effect it has on the entire system, and what that really means in terms of public safety, and what led you to go into that, all the things you could be doing as an accomplished attorney.
Yeah, you know, at the Illinois Innocence Project, we have been fortunate to gain the release of 20 innocent clients, people throughout Illinois who were wrongfully convicted. We currently represent close to 50 people who are still in prison fighting, and we have, you know, a queue of hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds of people who've asked for help, who are, you know, cases are being evaluated. We don't have the resources to get to. The issue of wrongful convictions is so massive. And I think that, you know, a lot of what we do as attorneys and volunteers and students at the Illinois Innocence Project involves really getting to know our clients and walking into prisons pre-COVID and hopefully soon again. But you can't physically enter a jail or a prison without being affected by it. And you can't represent individuals who are in the system without being impacted by the struggle that they face of being in prison, but also their families, what their families go through. And then also, especially in our role representing innocent people, every time an innocent person is convicted, the actual perpetrator got away with the crime. And victims are re-victimized when their cases come back to court and they realize this. So, you know, there's so many sort of ripple effects, and, you know, there's so much collateral damage to wrongful convictions. I think one of the most profound parts of our work is to see how the individual cases that we work on can be examples and can lead to systemic change that can help everyone in the system, you know, to treat people more humanely when they're brought in the system, try to prevent wrongful convictions from happening. I mean, the Safety Act, in so many ways that may not even be so obvious on its face, really does go to the heart of that. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I've heard Brian Stevenson speak and say, you know, proximity is so important. When you're proximate to something, you're impacted and you feel it. And so doing this work and being involved in this is something that once you feel it, you need to keep going, because there's so many people who need your help.
And that's really an important point. We talk about the importance of actually experiencing something sufficiently to feel it. That will be enough to really force you to act. When you see the inhumanity up close and personal, that actually leads me to ask you, Dr. Bittner, as professor, as you are kind of giving a lot of law students, honestly, probably their first entree to what this injustice system looks like. What sort of tactics or what sort of real strategies do you use to inspire these students to not only engage in this work in the context of, you know, pro bono work at 7-Eleven law students, but maybe even upon graduation, doing the sorts of things that these wonderful advocates are doing as well?
Thank you. So my background, so folks know, is I'm actually a retired sergeant from a police department that served a community of about 34,000 folks. And at the department, in addition to the regular supervisory duties that a sergeant has as a field training officer and a field training supervisor, and currently at Western Illinois University, we, in the Law Enforcement and Justice Administration program, we have a lot of courses that speak to exactly this. We have a ethics and public service program. We have, you know, the management and public service programs and things, but we cover a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this panel and our coursework. One of the things that I wanted to revisit real quick, and what Chief Davis said about courage. And I think Dr. Trice, if I remember right, is a retired law enforcement officer too. Is that correct, Dr. Trice? So one of the things that I've seen that I talk with the students to answer your question, Todd, is I talk about the courage that it takes to be a police officer. And I'm not talking about the courage to respond to calls. You know, we can all be trained to respond to calls. Sometimes the toughest part, and my fellow retired officers or chief, not retired, will probably support, is a lot of times it takes more courage and it's harder to stand up to the folks you work with when they're doing something wrong. And so what we need really in policing is serious people, serious managers, serious supervisors to encourage courageous folks to stand up to the officers who aren't doing what they're supposed to do, whether minor, moderate, or big issues. And we've all seen them. Too many times when folks would stand up to their coworkers, they instead of being rewarded and praised, they're ostracized and punished and excluded. And that just creates an atmosphere of where folks become apprehensive to doing the right thing. But in terms of, to answer the question, in terms of what we do with our students, we cover materials like that in the course, and then we try to back it up with anecdotal stuff from what we see, just to really highlight and illustrate what you should and should not do.
Yeah, and one of the things that was brought up is really a constant theme in the prior discussion with the legislators in the fireside chat was the entire notion that the Safety Act is not anti-police, it's pro-public safety. It's making sure people don't only feel safe when they're walking down dark alleys and there's people there, but also feel safe when they're interacting with the very people that we pay to serve and protect us. Let's talk a little bit about that and ways in which the Safety Act has manifested in making people more safe and how it would make people feel more safe. Can you share a little bit and help people understand some of the reforms that are in it, and also the way in which people really feel a tangible difference in the way they're being treated by police, whether they interact with folks who are turning their lives around, the redemptive aspects in it, or any part that you feel comfortable, whoever feels comfortable jumping in, we'll go from there and work down the line.
I can, go ahead.
Okay. I'll jump in with this one. I had the privilege and the honor to speak with a lady who had been impacted by the cash bail, and the fact that she did not have the money to post bail. She was actually charged for something that she was innocent. It had nothing to do with her, but she was arrested for it. She lost her house, she lost her kids, she lost her car, and she lost her job. And it was all because she was not able to post bail. And when it all is, said and done, and you find out that she actually had nothing to do with the case at all, there is no amount of sorry that you could say to someone when they have lost all of these things. And it's not like, when this happens, it's not like there's an edit and undo button. It doesn't exist for her. Right. So that is exactly what I just love talking to people and getting their testimonies, because these testimonies, again, they turn into public value. And this public value is how we influence our policies and who we are voting for and who we put in office. That's how we make sure that our voices are heard as citizens.
Yeah. And if I could, I just want to interject for just 2 minutes, just to add on and piggyback off of that for 1 second. And I heard Dr. Bittner and Chief Davis. He spoke to some points that I think were very poignant. As someone who's retired as assistant major, inside the system, you have this ecosystem both inside and out. And I think people don't realize that how strong the inside system of the law enforcement agency is. I think they kind of underestimate that value as a past law enforcement officer, as a college professor, and as someone that's a business owner that do backgrounds for more than 26 law enforcement agencies. Chief Davis hit it dead on the head. It starts at the door. As I said earlier in this, I probably interview and do backgrounds for about 250 law enforcement officers a year. That screening process, when I started the company, was intended to be a vetting system to stop the constant manipulation of the certification of officers going from one department to the other. And we do a full background, which also use evidence-based criteria for actually rating those officers' risk level when they go to another department. Therefore, if you hire someone that has been to 5 agencies and they're coming to your agency, and you have that information to know as a leader that this person has been either terminated, written up, disciplined several times, and you still choose to hire them, this leads back to that qualified immunity application process that everyone should be held accountable, not just the officer that actually engages in the negative act. And I just wanted to make sure that I got that in, because I think people underestimate that people like Chief Davis, Dr. Bednar, that have done this job. When you get out here, and I do trainings all over this country, I've been in 40 or 50 states training law enforcement officers, talking about these very issues, all the way up to false arrests and false convictions, and that you do become the bad person. But if you have the core and the value system and integrity, at the end of the day, you know you're doing the right thing. And I think that we can win the day as holistically if we stick to those core values.
Talk about things like core values and sticking to integrity. I know being chief of police, I mean, and especially being chief of, president of the association, that's something you get voted on. That's something that people make a decision on based on your conduct. How worried are you about the ways in which your bold positions, that even if they're articulating the truth, could cost you these opportunities to have these platforms that are so influential?
Well, my even prior to this, prior to George Floyd's murder, this has always been my voice. So those that hear it, those that elected me, they've heard this before. It didn't just start. I travel the country. I've developed classes where I teach my colleagues, primarily those who don't look like me. I teach them about what the things that I deal with as an African-American man and as an African-American police officer, and they're uncomfortable conversations, but that's how you grow, is by having those uncomfortable conversations. And once again, I've done that for many years prior to George Floyd being murdered. So when that did happen, folks knew that I was already talking about this. So that being in that position, I caught a lot of flack. I caught a lot of flack when the governor signed the bill into law. For those of you who saw the signing, I spoke at that signing, and talk about backlash, because there was from around the state of Illinois. At that time, I wasn't the president of the Illinois Chiefs Association, so I wasn't speaking on behalf of the Illinois Chiefs Association. I was actually speaking on behalf of another organization called NOBLE, which is a national organization of Black law enforcement executives. And there were so many people caught up in the fact that I spoke, and they didn't listen to what I said, but it didn't matter, because it's, there's just so much that's gone on behind the scenes, and that continue to go on behind the scenes as it pertains to this legislation. When you're sitting at the table, now this is about making the system better. This is about addressing systemic racism within an entire criminal justice system. And that's going back to your question about how the community is better off. This, as the elected official said, is a means to address that entire system. And so ultimately, it's about trying to correct some systemic racism. And the culture in law enforcement has to be addressed. We can make all the laws we want. We can make all the changes we want. But if culture doesn't change, then we're not going to make any progress. There's a saying that I stole from somebody else that says, culture eats policy for lunch. So, we've got to make sure. And what this legislation does is it forces the hand on some of that culture. And, that's I'm going to always speak that truth. That's all I know to speak. And I'll continue to do so. And there are those who will receive it, and there are those who won't. But when you're sitting in a room with a group of folks that's representing law enforcement, and it's supposed to be addressing the legislation that's helping with reform, and the definition of reform is change for the better. And one of those persons does a podcast during the same time period that says that there is no systemic racism. What are they talking about? So that's why it's got to be balanced at the table, so that there's somebody there to combat those things that are being said. And that's, once again, I believe that's my assignment.
And if I could jump in, Chief
Please.
Davis talking about culture. Illinois is known around the country as the, false confession capital of the world. And, Illinois has had 100 exoneration cases that had false confessions at the heart of those cases. That does not happen without a culture that is allowing, permitting, turning a blind eye, whatever, you want, however you want to phrase it. And I think, for so many decades, the policies have given law enforcement, given courts, the tools to coerce convictions, right? Like guilty pleas are 95% of cases in the United States. But if you look at the statistics in exoneration cases, 35% of exoneration cases involve official misconduct by law enforcement, by police, by prosecutors. Laws, the specifics in this law, a lot of that goes directly to that issue. So, information is power for us, right? When we're trying to investigate an old case and understand if an officer, are we to believe what this person is claiming this officer did? To have databases and to have that information be retained permanently, those are aspects of this law that really go towards that issue. At the same time, a tremendous amount of wrongful conviction cases involve well-intentioned police officers who got it wrong and would have not wanted to have gotten it wrong, right? But the policies in place, the procedures didn't permit for a person to be treated humanely and have their rights enforced and protected. Something as simple in this law that permits, or actually, demands that an individual who's in custody be given 3 phone calls within 3 hours of being at the police station, that they be given the phone number to the public defender's office. Little things like that can make a really big difference in an individual person's case. And system-wide, I think what this law really stands for is that, you know better, you do better. And Illinois has needed to do better for a long time. And there are some really specific things here that I think go to address, our area, specifically in the criminal justice field with innocence.
And I appreciate that. And as you were thinking about that, I wanted to look at some of the questions that have been posed by the audience. And one of the things that's kind of along the line of what you were saying, the Safety Act has so many different elements to it. You mentioned some of the police reforms, you mentioned bail reform, you mentioned even things as it relates to ensuring that defendants, people who are arrested, actually have their constitutional rights just observed in the most basic sense. Margie Taylor asked, what else is in the bill? Are there other things in the bill that you'd like to highlight? Dr. Bittner, if you have a moment, or any of the other folks who got on the panel, to make sure people have a better understanding of more of the things that this bill offers, and I'll get to a couple of the other questions posed by the audience as well.
Sure, and what I can draw from, of course, is my experience again, is some of the things in the bill pertaining to police and police performance are things that have been needed for a long time, such as de-escalation training. I'll teach de-escalation to supervisors and police managers through Let's Be EI. And it's just a lot of times I'm struck by how some of the concepts are still in today's times sometimes new to folks or new to police officers when we're talking with them. The newly hired officers are probably coming into policing with a little more training in issues of de-escalation and use of force, which is great. But sometimes reaching more senior officers is where we're seeing probably a need for increase in training. So there's an increase in training that hopefully goes a long ways. And it's just the supervision and hiring and training that really will, I think, if it's done by serious people, will make a serious change in it, which is what's needed.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that's another question, just right along that line, and I'll ask people to kind of go back to what else is in the bill. Mike Carnath also asked, aren't there extensive psychological evaluations being made before making these decisions? And given that, why is it that so many of the police still seem to have this chasm as it relates to the cultural understandings that really fuel the decisions to maybe respond with violence when it's unnecessary, or just responsible for the huge gap between community and police relations?
I'll hit that one if I can. So first of all, psychological evaluations are not required. So let's make sure that that's clear, that they are not required. A lot of departments do them, but they are not required by law to have psychological evaluations. And also, That goes to the hiring process. We have to look at who we're looking to attract to our profession. Real life example. I had to actually fire the company that was doing our psychological evaluations when I first came to this department. And the reason I fired them is I got a phone call from the examiner telling me one day that, hey, this guy here, I don't recommend this guy for your department. The reason I don't recommend him is that he's a nerd. He's got a degree in biology. He was in the band. He's a nerd. He couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag. Those were his words. He couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag. Actually, he left this on a voicemail, which was even better. But after hearing that, I called the owner of the company and I informed him. I said, I'm not paying you all this money to judge somebody's personality. I'm paying you money to find out if they have any psychological defects. And while we're at it, Mr. Owner, I was a computer programmer before I was a police officer. I went to an engineering college. I was a drum major in the marching band. I played the saxophone for 13 years. So that person that he was talking about could have been me. So I say that to say, we as leaders can continue to accept those evaluations from those that we're paying all this money to. Or for me, I don't need somebody who can fight. I can teach you how to protect yourself and those on the street. I need you to be, first and foremost, you have to have the ability to be empathetic so that you're dealing with people that don't necessarily come from the same background as you, and you're treating them fairly. Secondly, I need you to be able to communicate to people. And thirdly, I need you to be able to problem solve. Those are the characteristics that I'm looking for in my psychological evaluations. And that's some of the things that I'm pushing for as far as reform and how we operate in hiring folks. So when we have the right people coming through the door, the likelihood that we're going to have a better outcome is greater. Yeah. So those are the things that specifically to address that question that I'd like to say. So thanks.
And Todd, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's just, it looks like we're at the end of our time. And again, I would like to have this conversation go on for another probably hour. And I think we would actually keep most of our audience. So what an outstanding session all around. Like I said, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I have to sincerely apologize to all of our attendees who may have wanted to ask a question. But what we have agreed to do is to leave this link open for this webinar about 5 minutes or so after we officially close. So please, if you do happen to have questions that you'd like to address to any of our guests and presenters here today, we will make every effort to get that question out to them and get a response and then be able to post it, because you may have noted that this whole session was recorded. And thank goodness we did that, because some valuable insights and some input here that I think really deserve to be heard, and we'll make certain that we post that. So without further ado, I'm simply going to say thanks to all of our panelists, to all of our guests. Sincerely appreciate your participation in this great event. And once again, important issue. And again, this is an ongoing series for us, which we will continue to partner with the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. So the University of Illinois, in a partnership, will continue to put out programs like this. We hope you enjoyed your evening. Sorry for not having a chance to get to everybody's question, but my sincere thank you again to all of our panelists. Please, everyone, have a wonderful evening, and thanks again.
Thank you for having us. A wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Appreciate the opportunity, and senators. Thank you. Chief.
Thank you all once again for joining.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.